The footsteps echoed like whispers of the dead. A tourist in 2017 reported that while exploring the Roman catacombs with a guided tour, she strayed from the group for just a moment. The lights dimmed, her footsteps rang against damp stone, and suddenly, silence. When she turned to retrace her path, the corridor behind her had disappeared. She claimed she walked for minutes, though it felt like hours, and the only sound she heard was a faint scratching, not from rats, but from the walls themselves, as though bones buried within were clawing to escape. When she was finally found by the tour guide, pale and trembling, she muttered only one thing before collapsing. "They're still alive down there." Strange, chilling tales like hers echo throughout centuries of Roman history, fueling the mystery and terror of the catacombs. How can a place of sacred burial hold such an atmosphere of dread? Why do people continue to vanish in its endless tunnels? And what exactly did the ancients bury in the shadows, beyond human eyes, never meant to be disturbed? Before we plunge deeper into these cursed corridors, make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. Because in this journey, every twist in the labyrinth hides something darker than the last, and you won't want to miss what we uncover. Now, let us descend into the underworld beneath Rome. The Roman catacombs are not merely tombs. They are a second city, an empire beneath the empire. Stretching for hundreds of miles under the eternal city, they were first carved into volcanic rock during the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. Christians, forbidden from burying their dead within Rome's walls, created these underground necropolises in secrecy, away from the eyes of persecutors. Yet even as their hands carved resting places for loved ones, they could not have known they were building a world where death itself would refuse to rest. The catacombs were dark, narrow tunnels, lined with shelves carved into stone walls. Shelves that held bodies wrapped in cloth, sealed with slabs. Each turn looked the same, each passage twisting deeper into silence. In life, these were places of prayer, mourning, and reverence. In death, they became something else, a labyrinth of the forgotten, where the living could lose themselves as easily as the dead. But beneath the holy symbols and frescoes painted by early Christians lurks a paradox. The catacombs were not only burial grounds, but also hiding places for those fleeing Roman persecution. Imagine huddling in total darkness, the air damp and cold, hearing footsteps that were not your own. Were they the footsteps of fellow believers, or soldiers seeking to drag you to execution? Or perhaps, as some whispered, those footsteps belonged to spirits wandering endlessly, bound to the tunnels that entombed them. Over time, legends grew. The air inside the catacombs was said to thicken, making breathing difficult, as if the walls themselves were exhaling centuries of decay. Some claimed the rock absorbed the grief of thousands of mourners, and at night, the sorrow whispered back. Travelers spoke of voices calling their names, faint hymns sung in forgotten tongues, and cold hands brushing against their shoulders. What makes these stories so unnerving is that the catacombs themselves invite them. Once you step inside, you are surrounded not by one or two corpses, but by millions. It is estimated that the Roman catacombs hold the remains of over 6 million people. 6 million silent witnesses, 6 million restless souls. How can a place so vast, so filled with death, not echo with more than silence? During the Middle Ages, the tunnels fell into ruin. Rome's population shrank, and the catacombs became places of mystery and dread. Locals whispered that demons lurked within, that entering was to risk never returning. Outlaws and grave robbers occasionally ventured in, only to vanish without a trace. Skeletons found later sometimes bore strange marks, not merely from time or decay, but scratches, as if they had tried to claw their way out of stone. What kind of death was that? Accident or something worse? And yet, the church sought to guard these spaces, declaring them holy. But can holiness protect against fear? Can sanctity stop the mind from imagining shapes in the shadows? Even priests sworn to faith admitted unease. Some claimed they saw glowing lights weaving through the tunnels, will-o'-the-wisps, or perhaps the souls of martyrs seeking release. Others spoke of l'ombra lunga, the long shadow that stretched down passages, moving when no torch flickered, standing when no man was there. The deeper you descend, the stranger the air becomes. A musty dampness clings to your lungs, carrying the faint smell of rot, long since faded yet never gone. Every wall is filled with bones. Skulls stacked like forgotten guardians stare back from dark recesses. And always there is the unsettling sense of being watched. Not by statues or paintings, but by the countless dead, each one silently asking, "Why have you disturbed me?" But the most terrifying part is this: the catacombs were never fully mapped. Even today, miles of passages remain uncharted. Entire sections are sealed, not just because of instability, but because those who entered spoke of something they could not explain. A faint chanting, the sound of children's laughter, echoing though no children were there. And once, in the 16th century, a monk recorded that he saw a figure, tall and cloaked, walking between the tombs, though his feet made no sound upon the stone. He followed it, believing it to be another priest, but when the figure turned, its face was a skull with hollow burning eyes. The monk fled and never returned. So ask yourself, why does a place built for peace hold such terror? Why do the catacombs feel alive, as though the very walls breathe? And if they breathe, what else might they be hiding? We've only just begun to step into the shadows. In the next part, we'll descend deeper, where history and horror blend so completely that you can no longer tell one from the other. But beware, once you walk too far into the catacombs, you may never find your way back out. The air thickens the further you go. Every step deeper into the Roman catacombs is a step away from light, away from life, and into something else, a realm that feels closer to death than the world above. It isn't only darkness that greets you here, it is silence. A silence so profound it almost roars in your ears, pressing against your skull until even the sound of your own heartbeat feels intrusive. In that silence, fear begins to grow. The tunnels branch and twist, each one nearly identical, each one leading you deeper. You could close your eyes and walk forward, and when you opened them again, you would not know if you had moved at all. And yet, the walls are not still. Look closely and you'll see the grooves of chisels, the rough marks of hands that carved burial shelves into stone. And within those shelves, the dead. Thousands upon thousands of hollow eye sockets staring out, as if even in death they demand your attention. The deeper chambers were carved for the martyrs, those executed by the Roman Empire for their faith. Entire families were entombed here, mothers holding infants, men buried alongside their wives, all sealed into the walls of rock. Priests would sometimes come down to light oil lamps, praying by the faint flicker of fire, their voices echoing in Latin psalms. But the flames would sputter, and the shadows that clung to the walls seemed to twist and writhe, as if they were listening. Whispers of hauntings date back nearly 2,000 years. Stories tell of believers, huddled in the tunnels to worship in secret, suddenly seeing figures in the gloom. Sometimes the figures looked like soldiers, Roman guards, their armor rusted, their eyes empty. Other times they appeared as glowing, white-robed martyrs, silently walking past, carrying invisible torches. Witnesses described an icy coldness that followed in their wake, as though the very warmth of life was stripped from the air. But the stories didn't stop when Rome became Christian. In fact, they grew worse. By the 4th century, the catacombs had become pilgrimage sites, attracting the faithful. Yet pilgrims often spoke of strange occurrences. A group of travelers in the 5th century claimed they were guided by a monk who suddenly vanished mid-stride, leaving behind only the echo of his steps. Another account described a woman hearing the cries of a baby deep within the tunnels. She followed the sound, torch in hand, only to discover a sealed niche where a child's tiny skeleton lay cradled in stone. These legends might be dismissed as superstition, except that people continued to disappear. Centuries later, when explorers tried to map the tunnels, entire teams went missing. In the 17th century, a priest named Antonio Bosio, often called the Columbus of the Catacombs, nearly lost his life while searching through the labyrinth. His lantern extinguished unexpectedly, and he wandered for hours in suffocating darkness, stumbling blindly over bones. He later wrote that he heard a voice, low and steady, reciting a prayer in Latin, though no one was with him. He was eventually found by fellow explorers, shaking and half-mad, convinced that the dead had been calling him to join them. The further you descend, the less the catacombs feel like a man-made space and more like a living organism. The walls drip with moisture, the stone cracks, and the ceiling feels as though it is breathing, rising and falling, like lungs inhaling. Some believe that the volcanic rock, known as tufa, retains the energy of everything buried there. Every sob, every prayer, every scream of the condemned is trapped within its pores, released in subtle waves. That is why, some say, people hear voices in the tunnels even when alone. And yet, it is not only sound that haunts the living. The catacombs are said to produce visions. In the 1800s, when parts of the catacombs were opened for study, several archaeologists reported hallucinations. One man described seeing the walls pulse as though filled with blood. Another swore that a hand reached out from a sealed tomb, grasping at his cloak. Doctors claimed these were effects of the low oxygen, the damp, the psychological terror of being underground. But the survivors themselves insisted otherwise. One wrote in his journal, "It was not my mind that betrayed me. It was the dead themselves who reached for me." Among the most feared tales is that of the Guardiano delle Ossa, the guardian of bones. First recorded in medieval manuscripts, the guardian is described as a tall figure cloaked in shadows, his skeletal hands clutching a lantern made of bone. Those who see him claim he does not chase or attack. He only watches. If you follow him, he will lead you deeper into the labyrinth, away from the exit. His light seems to promise safety, but every step after him draws you closer to the parts of the catacombs that no map has ever touched. Those who vanish are said to have followed his glow willingly, hypnotized by the promise of light in eternal darkness. Skeptics dismiss the guardian as a myth, a personification of fear itself. Yet strange coincidences keep the story alive. Even modern visitors sometimes report seeing a faint light ahead of them, moving just out of reach, vanishing when they try to approach. And always, it seems to appear when someone strays from their group. But there are worse things whispered. Some believe the catacombs were never meant for the dead alone. Beneath the Christian burials lie older chambers, carved long before Rome embraced the cross. These tunnels, some say, were part of pagan rituals, blood sacrifices, and secret cults devoted to gods long forgotten. Archaeologists have found altars in certain sections, stained with what might once have been blood. Could the unrest in the catacombs come not from Christian martyrs, but from something far older, something that fed on fear and sacrifice? One chilling discovery in the 1970s seemed to confirm the rumors. A team of Italian researchers uncovered a hidden chamber sealed off for centuries. Inside were scattered bones, but not laid to rest. They were arranged. Skulls formed a circle around the remains of a goat. On the walls, crude symbols had been carved, symbols linked not to Christianity, but to rituals of the underworld. One archaeologist described the air as so oppressive, so heavy, that several team members fled in panic. The chamber was resealed, and few speak of it openly. Imagine walking there now. The torchlight barely cuts the dark. The walls close in, each corner like a mouth ready to swallow you whole. You hear a drip of water, or is it footsteps? A breath that is not yours. You reach the end of the passage, and the air grows colder. On the wall ahead, faint scratches form words, written centuries ago by a hand desperate to be heard. Non uscire. Do not leave. What could that mean? A warning, or the last madness of someone who knew they would never see the sun again. Perhaps the catacombs are cursed not only because of who lies within them, but because of what they represent. They are a reminder of mortality, of the fragility of life. They are endless, labyrinthine, impossible to conquer. And to walk among the bones of 6 million souls is to feel the weight of death pressing down on you, whispering that one day you too will join them. And yet, the catacombs call to us. We are drawn to them, compelled to enter, to explore, to test our courage against their silence. But the question lingers. When you enter the catacombs, do you walk among the dead? Or do the dead begin to walk among you? We are only halfway through this descent, and already the shadows are closing in. But in the next section, we go deeper still, into the forbidden chambers, into the rituals and relics hidden from the world above, into the darkest secrets that Rome has tried to keep buried for centuries. Are you ready to keep walking? Or will you turn back, leaving the catacombs to their silence and their shadows? The deeper you go into the Roman catacombs, the more time itself seems to break apart. The narrow passageways don't simply twist through stone, they twist through history, dragging you into eras that feel alive in the stale air. You enter with a torch or a flashlight, convinced you will return to the surface. But the further you descend, the more the catacombs demand that you leave something of yourself behind. By the time you reach the third level, most visitors describe an unmistakable sensation. The world above has been left behind, severed like an umbilical cord. No sound from Rome's busy streets penetrates here. Instead, you hear only the drip of water, the shuffle of your own shoes, and sometimes something else. A whisper at the edge of hearing. A sigh that echoes too close. Breathing that cannot belong to you. Historians estimate there are more than 60 catacomb complexes beneath Rome, stretching over 400 miles. But only a handful are mapped, and even fewer are open to the public. The rest are sealed off, barricaded, or forgotten, not because they are unstable, but because of what people have reported inside them. One such forbidden chamber lies beneath the catacomb of Domitilla. Officially, it is closed due to structural instability, but those who know the archives tell another story. In the late 1800s, a team of Jesuit scholars descended to catalogue the frescoes on its walls. They made it to a chamber with a painted ceiling depicting vines, doves, and shepherds. Harmless Christian symbols. But beyond it, a collapsed tunnel revealed something far stranger. A chamber covered not with images of Christ, but with serpents, skulls, and what looked like ritual fires. The men wrote hastily in their journals that the place reeked of an older faith, something pagan, pre-Christian, and hostile. They described niches not for bodies, but for objects, relics that seemed deliberately hidden. In one alcove, they claimed to find a bronze bowl, its surface etched with geometric spirals that seemed to shift in the lamplight. When they attempted to lift it, the air grew oppressively hot, though the chamber itself was damp and cold. One of the Jesuits collapsed, convulsing, muttering in a tongue the others did not understand. They fled, leaving the object behind. The chamber was sealed. Official reports mention only a hazardous collapse. But private letters between the Jesuits whisper of a cursed relic that should never see light again. This isn't the only account of forbidden artifacts. In the 20th century, Italian archaeologists working near the catacombs of Calixtus found what they described as an ossuary of anomalies. Bones stacked not in the Christian manner, but in patterns, spirals, triangles, even crude star shapes. Some skulls had carvings scratched into them, runes not recognized by any Christian scholar. One skull bore the carved image of a serpent devouring its tail, the ancient symbol of eternity. More disturbing still, locals whispered that workers went missing during the excavation. Their lanterns were found extinguished, their tools abandoned, but their bodies never recovered. Official records state only that several men abandoned the project for fear of collapse. But among those who stayed, the story was different. The men had wandered too far and were claimed by something in the tunnels. For centuries, Rome itself has seemed to conspire to keep these secrets hidden. When invaders came, they reported seeing lights flickering in the earth at night, When plague struck, people claimed they heard moaning beneath their homes, as if the dead were crying out. Priests forbade the faithful from descending without permission, warning of temptations and false visions that could lead them astray. But the most terrifying stories come from those who ignored the warnings. One chilling account comes from 1937. A group of German tourists, fascinated by Rome's ancient underground, bribed a guide to take them into a closed section of the catacombs. Hours later, the guide returned alone, frantic, claiming the group had vanished. Authorities accused him of murder, but no bodies were ever found. When interrogated, the man repeated only one phrase: "They followed the light. I told them not to follow the light." What light? He described it as a faint glow at the end of a passage, like the flame of a candle. The tourists believed it was another chamber, perhaps even another exit. They went toward it, ignoring his cries, and never returned. When rescuers searched, they found nothing but a long corridor that ended in a wall of stone. No chamber, no light, no tourists. To this day, no explanation has been given. Skeptics dismiss these tales as exaggerations, hysteria, or the tricks of oxygen deprivation. But there are too many stories, spread across too many centuries to dismiss them all. In fact, the pattern seems undeniable. The deeper you go, the stranger the phenomena become. Some describe hearing chanting. Others say they have seen robed figures standing in alcoves, motionless, watching. And then there are those who describe a far more terrifying presence, the shadow congregation. The shadow congregation is said to appear only when one is utterly lost, far from the surface. Survivors claim they saw dozens, sometimes hundreds, of hooded figures kneeling in silence. At first, they seemed carved from the stone itself, but then they began to move, their heads turning in unison toward the intruder. Witnesses described the same unbearable sensation, their hearts pounding, their breath vanishing, their limbs paralyzed with dread. And then the figures rise, slowly, deliberately, as if to surround them. The shadow congregation never speaks. They never run. They only advance. The victims who escape always say the same thing. They ran blindly and did not look back. Those who did look back, or those who hesitated, were never seen again. Are these figures the spirits of martyrs, or something else entirely? Some theories suggest they are echoes, psychic imprints of the countless worshippers who once huddled in these tunnels during persecution. Others whisper they are guardians, punishing intruders who trespass into the forbidden chambers. But the most disturbing theory is that they are not human at all, that they are something that predated the catacombs and only used them as a vessel, a shell to linger in the human world. If that sounds far-fetched, consider this. In 2002, a documentary team attempted to film in a lesser-known branch of the catacombs. They recorded audio of their expedition, much of which survives today. At one point, the cameraman whispers, "Do you hear that? It's chanting." But the others insist they hear nothing. Minutes later, the audio picks up a low drone, unmistakably human voices, layered and echoing. Then, suddenly, the tape ends. The team returned, shaken, refusing to discuss what happened. One crew member abandoned archaeology entirely, later writing, "I have seen enough of the Earth's darkness. I will never go underground again." The catacombs are more than tombs. They are a crossroads between life and death, faith and fear, history and legend. Every wall tells a story. Some are painted in bright colors, frescoes of saints and shepherds. Others are scratched in desperation, cries for help, prayers for salvation. And beneath those stories, another layer whispers, one of curses, rituals, and shadows that should never have been disturbed. Even the church itself has struggled with these places. Over the centuries, relics from the catacombs were taken and distributed across Europe. Bones of supposed martyrs enshrined in gold and glass. But in some towns, strange disasters followed. Fires, plagues, madness. Priests sometimes quietly returned the relics, burying them again, as if the bones demanded to rest where they were first laid. So the question remains, what exactly lies in the forbidden chambers? Are they remnants of forgotten cults, or doorways to something darker? Why do people vanish without trace? Why do shadows walk where no living feet should tread? And if you were to descend now, alone, with only the dim light of your torch, would you find your way back? Or would you follow a glow that promises escape, only to lead you deeper into the embrace of the dead? The truth waits for us in the lowest levels, where no pilgrim ever dared tread, where archaeologists sealed their discoveries, and where Rome itself pretends there is nothing to see. But we are going there next, and what we find may change how we think of the catacombs forever. By the time you reach the lowest levels of the Roman catacombs, you begin to question if you've truly descended, or if you've crossed into something else entirely. The air grows heavy, thick with damp earth and a strange metallic tang, like rusted iron or dried blood. Even modern explorers describe this final threshold as suffocating, as though the tunnels themselves resist their presence. In maps preserved by archaeologists, the catacombs appear logical, structured, like a honeycomb designed by human hands. But those who venture far enough report a different experience. Corridors begin to bend at unnatural angles. Walls curve subtly inward, pressing closer with each step. In some passages, the ceilings dip so low that explorers must crawl, scraping their backs against stone worn smooth, not by centuries of erosion, but by the passage of countless hands and bodies long before them. It is here that the whispers begin. Soft at first, like the faint echo of water dripping. But the more you listen, the clearer they become. Some describe them as prayers in Latin. Others swear they hear names being called, sometimes their own. One archaeologist in the 1970s recounted hearing the voice of his dead father, begging him to turn back. He ran, abandoning his equipment, and never returned to subterranean work again. The most unsettling accounts come from those who describe choirs. Not the gentle hymns of early Christians, but a chorus of groans, chants, and guttural cries, as though a mass were being held in some chamber ahead. When the explorers followed the sound, they found nothing but silence, walls slick with condensation, and the unmistakable sensation of being watched. Yet there are chambers down here that do not appear on any official map. They exist in whispered reports, in forbidden photographs smuggled into archives, in the journals of priests who swore secrecy under threat of excommunication. These are the cursed halls, places where Rome's oldest shadows linger. One such chamber, uncovered accidentally during maintenance in the 1950s, was described by a worker named Pietro. He and his crew broke through a wall expecting a simple corridor. Instead, they found a circular room, its floor covered in bones. But these bones were not scattered. They were arranged in deliberate spirals radiating outward from the center. In the middle stood a black stone altar, stained as though with centuries of use. Pietro claimed he saw carvings along the altar's edge, symbols of serpents, flames, and stars, unlike any Christian iconography. When priests arrived to investigate, the chamber was hastily sealed. Pietro was ordered never to speak of it again. Yet, in his private letters, he described waking at night to see the spiral pattern in his dreams. He heard voices urging him to return. Within a year, Pietro disappeared. His family insisted he must have gone back, unable to resist the pull. He was never seen again. Another infamous discovery came during the Second World War. Soldiers occupying Rome used the catacombs as shelter and hiding places. In one report, a unit claimed to have stumbled upon a hidden vault. They found frescoes not of Christ or saints, but of figures with elongated limbs, clawed hands, and gaping mouths. At the bottom of the fresco was a Latin inscription, barely legible. "They feed in silence." The soldiers laughed, dismissing it as primitive art. But weeks later, members of the unit began to vanish during night patrols. One by one, their bodies never recovered. Survivors whispered that the catacombs had claimed them, that the fresco was not art, but warning. What were these chambers used for? Theories abound. Some suggest they were sanctuaries for heretical sects, Christian offshoots who mixed their faith with older, darker rituals. Others argue they predate Christianity entirely, that beneath Rome lies a far older necropolis, one absorbed and hidden by the later catacombs. And then there are the most terrifying claims, that these chambers are not simply tombs, but gateways. The gate theory, as it is called in whispered circles, proposes that certain catacomb chambers function as liminal spaces, thin points where the veil between the living and the dead is weakest. The spirals of bones, the chanting, the apparitions, they are all signs of a place where the barrier wears thin. The early Christians may have known this, deliberately burying their dead here not only to hide from persecution, but to rest close to the threshold of eternity. But what happens when those thresholds open? Modern explorers who have dared the forbidden levels tell chillingly consistent tales. One Italian spelunker in the 1990s claimed he reached a chamber unlike anything he'd seen before. The walls were covered in soot, as though from fire. The floor was littered with bones, small and delicate. Not adult skeletons, but children. In the center was a pit, descending further than his flashlight could reach. As he leaned closer, he swore he saw movement below, a ripple, as if something vast shifted in the dark. Terrified, he fled, but not before hearing a single sound rising from the pit. A low exhalation, like the sigh of something waking. Another account comes from a group of urban explorers in 2011. They ventured with cameras into a sealed-off section near the Via Latina catacombs. For the first hour, everything was uneventful. Then, on their footage, the air temperature abruptly dropped. Their breath steamed. The sound of their voices warped, as if the walls themselves were distorting the audio. And then, in the last recovered video, the camera catches a shape at the edge of the light. A tall, cloaked figure, motionless, its head tilted unnaturally to one side. The explorers panicked, the footage shakes violently, and then the recording ends. Their families confirmed, none of them returned. What are these figures? Spirits of martyrs? Guardians of sacred ground? Or something darker? Entities that were worshipped long before Christianity, still feeding in silence beneath the eternal city. The Vatican officially denies the existence of cursed chambers. Yet rumors persist of a secret order within the church, tasked with sealing and guarding these sites. Some whisper of the Custodes Umbrae, the keepers of shadows, monks sworn to patrol the deepest catacombs, ensuring no one disturbs the gates. If true, it would explain why so many discoveries vanish from public record, why chambers are sealed with such urgency, and why the Vatican archives contain files marked Subterraneus Damnatis, the damned subterraneans. And here lies the most unsettling question. If the Church knows what waits below, are they protecting us from it, or protecting it from us? Imagine standing now in one of those forbidden chambers. Your torch flickers against walls slick with centuries of moisture. You hear the drip of water, but then you realize it's not water. It's the soft patter of footsteps, dozens of them, moving in unison, coming closer. You swing the light, and in the alcoves around you figures stir. Their eyes gleam faintly, not with the reflection of your torch, but with their own pale fire. You remember the inscription, they feed in silence. The walls seem to pulse, the air is heavy. You realize that the catacombs are not empty. They have never been empty. They are waiting, watching. And the deeper you go, the hungrier they become. So when the next tourist descends with a camera, when the next scholar dares to map a forbidden corridor, the question is not whether they will find something. The question is whether they will come back at all. Because the catacombs are more than a city of the dead. They are a trapdoor beneath history, a secret Rome beneath Rome, a labyrinth that feeds. And the further you descend, the more you become part of it. Your footsteps are absorbed into its walls. Your breath becomes part of its whispers. Your bones, eventually, are added to the spiral. And someday, when another intruder ventures too deep, it may be your shadow that turns to watch them. The catacombs are cursed, and Rome will never admit how deep that curse runs.